What we're going to do is we're going to have a chat, as Nora mentioned. We're going to talk about kind of at that meta level, what does all of this mean? And as I've been listening to you and we've been hearing each other's pitches, what I've gotten from you is that this really is, when we look at business and commerce, as I mentioned before at the start, this sits at the intersection of government and people. So with Velotax, sits at the center of people and people, as with Chimege. With Beanified, it sits at that intersection of business and business, or financial institutions and bad people, money launderers, as with Lucinity. And with Arbor, it really sits at that intersection, that nexus of business and the world. So what are the environmental, social, governance aspects of a business that we need to take into account? How do we measure that? And it's so hard. And so it's that intersection, again, in a post-COVID connectivity boom, that is so fascinating. And I think that it's something that if we don't address that, we're going to have issues. So these are great solutions, innovative solutions in some wonderful countries, fascinating markets and sub-markets that really matter, And again, whether it's intentional or unintentional, are often overlooked. So what I'll do, from my standpoint, I really want to hear from Enrique. Enrique is an expert in this area. He joined Speedinvest, which is a fintech firm. He's been there for now going on 4 years. And he works as an associate, and he focuses mainly on Southern Europe and also on developing countries. So before that, he was with Ernst & Young, looking at transaction advisory services. So, quite applicable to a lot of what you're dealing with. And he's worked in business development as a project management role with various startups in Germany, in Berlin. So as we're looking together with Enrique and with the team, we really want to hear your thoughts. So Enrique, I might turn the floor over to you to give a bit of your perspective and thoughts on this, on what you've heard at this stage. And then I'll pitch a few questions. I'll throw it out for you guys and just hear a little bit about your thoughts on the other projects. And again, speaking at that meta level, at that broad kind of umbrella of what you're doing, the space you're working in. I know that the people would really love to hear what your thoughts are. So Enrique.
Sure. Thank you very much. It was really interesting to listen to all of you. It was pretty insightful to see how you guys are tackling some of the issues that we also have here in Europe and everywhere in the world. And I think that I was thinking all over was actually, like, for all of these companies, I could talk about a couple of counterparts that do this in Europe and the US. And I think that kind of shows the applicability of technology in everywhere, actually. No, so it doesn't really matter if you sit now for Velotax, for instance. If you want to file your taxes and use technology for it, doesn't really matter if you're in Brazil or if you're in Germany or in the US. It is a pain for everyone, and that's why there is solutions for it. No, the total addressable market is there. The need for an integrated and easy to waste solution is there. And at the end of the day, that creates the possibility to innovation to emerge. So I think that's something that we could go through this entire list of amazing pitches that we heard today and basically explain this. Obviously, we cannot do only these copy paste models. You have to understand the local nuances of all these places and understand, okay, how does I don't know, I'm staying with Velotax just an example. No? How often do people need to file their taxes? No, if we look into Spain, for instance, it's every 3-4 months, I think, and if we look into Germany, it's every year. No, so then the recurrence of revenue changes depending on the country where you are. But yeah, ultimately, I think that was really interesting to hear, and also interesting to see how all these business models are starting to pop up all over the world by amazing entrepreneurs, and that these entrepreneurs are really shaping the future of technology in all these places.
Thanks so much, Enrique. And it's, feel free to jump in on the discussion. But I think much of what I want to hear from you, and you're the experts, and I've done a startup myself, and it is hard. The day-to-day grind is so tough. And you're in the middle of code, and you're in the middle of user onboarding. Constantly, every day, you're questioning, am I brilliant Einstein, or am I the village idiot? It's this weird existence of thinking you've got a brilliant solution, the next Google, and then the next moment, you're just worn out, tired, and you think you're not on the right track. And we've all been there. Many people on the call understand that world you're living in, which is tough. So a big tip of the hat to all of you who are going through that. Much respect. I want to pull it back. And so I want to ask you a tough question, because the world we're living in now, and consider this off the record. So I'd ask the jurors to, so that we can speak freely. So we're sitting around the table with a tea or a coffee, and, nobody's watching. And I want to hear from you. We live in a really weird world where almost every quarter, if we're speaking in business terms, every quarter, every week, something's changing socially, politically, some movements happening, some new solution got put out that changes the entire market dynamics. And so for you, living in that weird week to week, quarter by quarter, political cycle, election cycle to election cycle world, what are your hopes for sustainability? All of you are in some way looking at society and improving society in your own way. Do you think people care? Do you think people care at a broad level, or do you think your solutions are niche? In what? So that's question one. And then question two is, to what extent do you think you or your colleagues, because we're all on the same team, right, can help expand that, society's caring about this? And I'd also ask the people watching, put that forward to Airmeet. We would love to hear your thoughts as well. I saw first, one sec. Was it Alex, you popped up, yeah?
Yeah, I feel like this question is directly tailored for me, so let's just go ahead. In terms of like the policies and the politics and like do people care kind of thing, what I've seen is, sorry, when we first started this, so it was right at actually the beginning of the pandemic. We were kind of at that point just trying to mess around with some ideas, but we always wanted to do something in sustainability and software. And so at that point, actually, if you look on Google Trends, I think it was like February 2020, the term ESG, like no one knew what it was at all. But if you map on Google Trends, the popularity of the term, it has exploded ever since. Like it's literally an exponential. And I don't think ESG is a great metric because it's just not, it's kind of flawed. For like regular consumers and businesses and stuff like that. But the caring of sustainability has just exploded since COVID started, and it just seems because of when everyone was kind of in lockdown and things like that, the actual impacts of less human activity and more thought process to that less human activity was visible. Like you could see actual visible impact of environments changing, habitats kind of coming back to normal and things like that. And so that was the first time that I saw that actually like a collective effort can lead to something, a larger result. And so what we've seen as well is, especially even just the beginning of this year, it's not just consumers that are driving the change. It's governments. So, especially within Europe, there are so many policies coming in now over the next 5 to 10 years that are going to be heavily regulating products that are, high emissions or whatever it is. adding taxes on those to sell them or to import them, whatever it is. And so we've just seen a massive change since the beginning of this year where businesses actually already understand the importance of sustainability to the consumer demand, but also to the region that they're working within. And so it's just getting bigger and bigger, and it's not really a trend anymore.
Thanks. Other thoughts? I mean, do people care about, does the broader public care about money laundering? Does the broader public care about paying their taxes on time? To what extent do you feel you as a startup can contribute to that collective caring, society's investment in itself? What are your thoughts? Yeah, Victor.
So everything that you said here in Brazil happens all the time. So changes in the political environment, and we had major issues with corruptions. But I think the technology is the ultimate tool for us to provide a better society. That's one thing that we are doing here. Because there's no middleman, or there's fewer middlemen to the extent that some people they are in doubt about their taxes, or they need to have a higher refund, or they need to pay less because of the inflation or something like that, and they can go to Velotax in our YouTube and see that we have almost like 200 videos and learn, and they can put a comment, and then we can help them. So I think this is the engine of change in our society as of today. Things are evolving much faster than before with blockchain and other technologies as well. But I think we have a good chance here to really change society and to help people that they don't know where to seek for help, and we can with our companies in every field here, we can be there strong and provide better solutions. I think that's one effort that everyone here is doing, and as like I can only speak for myself, but the feedbacks that we are receiving are very encouraging because people say, "Oh, I never imagined that I could do something which is kind of complicated. Everything is afraid of the IRS to pay high fees, or if you do something wrong, you can get your tax ID blocked. You cannot get financing, and we are providing an easy solution for them." So that's when we feel here that besides all the difficulties on the day-to-day basis, we are on the right track.
And from the audience on Eric, please do jump in. I mean, we really do want to hear from you. Thanks, Victor, so much. And for any of the other, would anybody else have anything to jump in on that with? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I maybe want to just build on this point of whether people care or not. And at Lucinity, we kind of take on the responsibility of making people care. I think on a meta level, people do not care about the problem of money laundering because it's too fickle, it's too far from them. And our job is to place it in the context of people's kitchen tables. And the way that we've gone about kind of framing that issue in our respect is talking about things like, you do not want your mortgage to be financed with money from a human trafficking circle, which is the case in some cases. Like, we all benefit from cleaning out, bad money from the financial system and crowding out those criminals. And we're not talking about, a painter avoiding tax or even white-collar crime. We're talking about real actions happening to real people that often belong to marginalized groups around the world. And a positive frame on that terrible story can also be a driver for business in our respect. So it kind of plays to both sides of that coin. So my recommendation is never going to be to wait for people to care, but to make them care, because these are real issues and they're happening now.
Thanks so much, and I think that's a really good point. I think it's when you have these issues, whether you're talking climate change and people live in Nebraska and they're not living in the Marshall Islands, and you have this problem that is far off, and you don't come into contact with it every day. That is a mission in and of itself to make people understand first, right? Because it's complex stuff. But then also understand the genuine, real, everyday proximity, how close it is to their lives. Again, because it's really complex, almost, PhD level in economics or finance to understand it, right? So it's also a communications challenge, right? Dorothy, I saw you first, and then Enrique.
Thank you. I was just thinking about the comment that a lot of the apps that we are seeing you could see them as retrofitted apps that are already deployed in other markets. Of course, for every single retrofitting, a certain level of local knowledge is necessary to make it work. But I think that when it comes to the language issue, it's one of the most central developmental issues that we have come to recognize today. When the SDGs were developed, language wasn't included. And now they see with things like COVID, where you're trying to get information on how to keep safe, but you don't have any way of putting it in local languages so that people actually understand. Language has now been understood as central to development. And the fact is that in most of our countries, I'm from Ghana, I speak English fluently, but I'm one of 30% of Ghanaians who speak English fluently. We are a multilingual society. We need to be able to interpret and communicate between our languages. And so I see what has happened in Mongolia as being very important for developing countries. Because the other thing is retrofitting for the small scale. And just remember, as soon as your retrofitted product becomes really large and profitable, you risk being picked up by a platform, which will then homogenize with the whole of the rest of the world. So I think that when it comes to innovation, we must recognize that retrofitting is still innovation. It's still making exciting things happen on the ground. And in language, no retrofitting. It's AI technologies, yes, but there's so much more to it. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Dorothy. So just a quick note, Abdullah has jumped in to replace Alex for Arbor. Alex had a quick meeting he had to attend to, but Abdullah will be taking over. Enrique, saw your hand first, and then we'll move on to Renew.
Awesome. Yeah, just wanted to follow up on the question that you had of do people really care about what we're doing or what you guys are building? And maybe I'm very simplistic here. Maybe I'm too much of a capitalist here. But what I think is the market will tell us if they really care about it or not. Do people care, or do banks care about eventually being fined hundreds of millions of dollars? If they do, then they will get a contract with Lucinity. Do people care about eventually getting fined if they don't file the taxes? And they will use Velotax. Do they mind about finding the best and cheapest construction material? Then they will use a BinaApp. So at the end of the day, the market will define what they care about or not. And obviously, at the end of the day, the government of each of these regions plays a massive role here, no? By imposing rules and sanctions in case you do not comply with whatever rules they're setting. And the companies around it, what they're trying to do is create an easy two-way solution in order for people to comply with those rules, at least a couple of the companies that we heard. So answering your question, at least from my perspective, is the market will tell us. And but as mentioned before, the fact that we've seen these business models turn out very, very profitable and positive in other parts of the world makes me at least be very positive about the fact that they do care about these things.
Hey, thanks so much, Enrique. Renu, how'd you next? And I think it's totally correct. I mean, I think it really centers on what are people pressure, because government is a two-way street. Government is, in theory, for the people and by the people, but to what extent are governments willing to impose those restrictions, if something goes wrong? So I think it's a really interesting kind of wicked problem that with a lot of questions to answer. So, Renu.
Thank you so much for the great question. I'm going to talk about a little in construction industry and in Iraq as an example. We are from Iraq, and BinaApp is the only digital platform that where you can find list of professional service providers and construction materials digitally. We don't have any data, any digital preference where if you want to find a worker to do a gypsum plastering work, you have to find that person through your connection. Because you cannot find it online. There's no data. And if you want to know the price of one bag of cement, you have to go to a store and see what is the price of one bag of cement. And at this century where tech is conquering the world, but our country is hopefully developing. And about if people care about our product, people want their life to be easier every day, and if they get benefit from something, of course they will return to that. And for us, in the construction market, most of the time the right people are not chosen for the job due to lack of ratings and reviews online or any other way. So through our solution, we have been able to provide and to fill that crack in the construction market in Iraq. And it is also implemented in a way that can be useful to the other countries with a little customization. And after the COVID, it impacted our country a lot in Iraq because due to the lockdown, people before the lockdown, they were not so much into tech, and they didn't use the application to do their daily jobs. But right now the numbers are increasing. People are using application. People are using technology to facilitate their life. So that's what I have to say in terms of construction and the impacts on construction industry in Iraq.
Hey, thanks so much. And I would ask if your question has been answered, or you've asked your question or made your comment, please put your hand down. But that was really, I think it's quite insightful, though. And Jana, we'd really like to hear what you have to say, and then Nokbat from Mongolia. But Jan, let us know what you think.
Yeah, digital transformation is already there in every land, in every country. And in Mongolia, how digital transformation transform the whole society. We are forced to abandon native language and learn other English or other languages, or we are left out from the high advanced technologies like virtual assistant, robotic, etc. And that's why we have started to work on this field, and no tech giant help us to solve these languages, marginal languages, which are slowly dying out. And we are also one part of this world.
Absolutely, and I think it's critical to not see communities or societies as one thing. It's not Western Europe, it's not North America, it's not Latin America, but it's also Central Asia, and Central Asia is not one unit. It's a vast array of cultures, and as you're working on languages, so making people care about access to communications is also critical. Jan, so what were your thoughts? I saw your hand has been up. What are your thoughts there in Iceland?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't pick up the Jon name. It's started to remember because of the mixed computers. So I was just thinking on those kind of market comments, like, we live in this situation in the AML world where a lot of financial institutions budget for money laundering fines. And the question is, to what extent is the system working if that's taken into account in your yearly planning? And the same can apply to 2021 being a record year for fossil fuel consumption while we're doing the COP conference. Like, I think I'm obviously a firm believer in the power of the market, but it still needs visionary leaders and bold people to kind of take that first step. As soon as a Fortune 500 bank talks about the fact that they are no longer budgeting for money laundering failures because they believe in taking responsibility, how does that change the market dynamics? And I think now it's this kind of notion of moving from a zero-sum capitalistic world into this new definition of capitalism where it's a win-win economy. By using technology and innovative ideas, we can collectively move forward. And that takes guts, ingenuity, and just big thinking from anywhere in the world. And it's such a pleasure also just, sitting and talking with you guys to see that this is happening all over. Like, Mongolia that's a distance away from Reykjavik at this point.
Absolutely, and it's what is absolutely fascinating is seeing that. Again, as you do a startup, you exist in this really tiny world. We all do, and we all think we're alone, and we're not connected in any way. And the only outside people we think about are customers, who we have to turn our accounts into, and who our competitors are, and who we're going to try to get investment from. And so our world, and also, whether you're on tech or sales or in business management, your world is that, right? And so it's actually quite a lonely experience. And also nobody can really relate to one another. And so I think that's, you can't go out to the mall or with your friends because it's really tough because you don't really understand what running a startup is like. And then second, people especially don't understand what it's like to run people, planet, profit startup. That's a whole nother world that you're dealing with. So it can be a really strange existence, but I think that's one of the beautiful parts about World Summit Awards is that you realize, whether there's a competitive thing going on, you realize you're usually not in a competitive relationship. People are in different markets, doing different things, but all of you think the same way, which is really, really neat. we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to do a very quick round. I want to hear from everyone. I want to understand, because we've lived in this COVID world now for almost exactly 2 years, a little over. I know how dynamic startups are. I know that your models, your approaches, your interface can change, again, every 3 months or less. And so how has COVID impacted you in your company? Have you iterated? Have you changed your approach? Has it become easier? Have people been more responsive to your solution since COVID? What have been the interactions? And so maybe we start out going bottom up. So Victor, maybe we start with you in Brazil, and we'll kind of go last to first in terms of order. So Victor, maybe start off. How has COVID impacted your company? Has it become easier, harder? Have you iterated because of COVID? What's it been like?
So we were born during COVID. So and at the beginning, I think it was kind of easier because we went to look for developers and every person around the country. So we have a huge country. So I think it made it easier and also more productive to have meetings with partners, to partner with, I don't know, exchanges or brokers from the investment side. So I think it helped on that sense. Right now we are in a good point with COVID here in Brazil. So we have some people in the office. We are producing some content. So this present time that we have together is also very good because we can exchange ideas and we can think more about strategy, which is easier to communicate. But we are having a hybrid approach. So I think we are getting the best out of the two models. And I think it's how business are going to evolve in the future. And I think from the COVID type of work, I think it helped more than it harmed.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Mongbat, how are things in Mongolia? As your business has grown and evolved through COVID, how has it impacted what you do with Chimege?
So COVID was here in Mongolia affected very, very hard. And we had many lockdowns, hard lockdowns. It was, of course, very negative. It has a very negative impact for businesses, especially for us just starting. However, it has also another points, and it pushes to use people to use technology, just like these Teams and Zoom, etc. And they are somehow understanding how important is it, and already integrated in our everyday world. And even for us, it has positively influenced to sell our products, like transcribing meeting minutes to text, etc. And it also pushes us to communicate to international field via internet, and yeah, altogether the positive side was more than the negative.
It's again fascinating that your startup, that your company has actually grown and evolved and adapted into that COVID and post-COVID world. So very interesting. In Iraq, what has been the impact of COVID on BinaApp? Have people become more willing to use it? Have you changed your approach? What's been the impact of COVID?
In our country and on our business, it has two sides of impact, positive and negative. The positive one was mobile users for application and for the websites increased due to the life necessity during the lockdown. That was the positive impact, but the negative, it has also a great negative impact, especially on construction, because due to the lockdown and the COVID, most of the construction projects stopped. So when the construction projects stopped, we were not being able to find job for our users, and it was very hard for us at that time, and we had to have some different approach. We are more focused on the private individual who are building their house by themselves. So it caused changing on the plan, changing on our revenue has had a huge impact on our revenue. That is, I think I can say the negative impact is more on the construction market increased after the COVID.
And it's fascinating. I mean, it hits on so many things that we see. I mean, we're even though a tech solution, whether it's GovTech, CivTech, FinTech, it is tied to a market. You are tied to a real non-tech market. And I think in COVID, some platforms can jump up and be boosted, but when you're rooted in a real physical market like construction, I mean, I think what you're saying, it shows that the world was impacted. Real people, real things, real movements of money. We can't neglect the fact that we were all, hurt in a way. But I think what's fascinating is that it has allowed you and has allowed us to think in new ways about what we do. We looked there at Lucinity and John, like in Iceland. Again, what are your thoughts on this? Has positive, negative, somewhere in between?
Yeah, I think for us it's been somewhere in between. Obviously, we felt the kind of logistics effects like everybody, but we've also been impacted by just general slowdown at times, and the kind of hype cycle of how bad this will get or how quickly it's going back to normal. And then I think the thing that I kind of most cherish from going through this experience is the soft stuff. It's just having people around you and the water cooler conversations that turn into the next revolutionary idea and so forth. And, for us, I think that we just have to be grateful for how this has been handled for us locally. We have most of our team located here in Iceland, although we have about 15 people elsewhere. So being able to, it was cool to stay in the summer house for the first couple of weeks, but after that it got very lonely. And the synergy of having people in the same place and being able to work with the wonderful team that we have here, it really kind of hit that home and reminded us of how the power that gets created with people in the same room.
Totally. And a startup is just not investment. It's not just customers. It's not just how well have you designed your 10-slide pitch deck. It is mostly the people you're working with and those ideas that are born around the water cooler. So it is, again, fascinating that you said that, because I mean, all this is real stuff that I know everyone is thinking. Thank you. Abdullah, we'll turn it over to you over there in Calgary, Alberta, and ask you kind of how has this impacted Arbor?
Yeah, so Arbor is actually a COVID baby as well. And I think because of those reasons, we had to face the challenge of building a company and a culture when your employees, your advisors, your partners, your customers are all virtual? Like, how do you necessarily replicate something that doesn't exist? But I think for a company that's starting off new, it was actually pretty advantageous for us because it kept the cost pretty low. So because most of our customers were in Europe, we could, wake up 30 minutes before the meeting and then hop on a call instead of having to set up a week of just travel and having to go in person and then also having to invest all these resources and actually getting that face to face. So I think we very quickly realized that, like, as long as we made the most out of this time during COVID, no matter how long this is, for things that are only possible during this season, we will set up our company in a pretty good space. And now that it's been going on for 2 years, and hopefully it's almost done, now we're actually facing the challenges of being a company that was created in COVID, because we have a great culture virtually, but now we have our operational team that actually works in person. And now we're trying to, like, break off teams that prefer to work in person and the ones that actually like to turn to those revolutionary ideas around the water table. And then the ones that, a lot of us are developers and data scientist people. So those people like to work in a dark, cold room by themselves. So now we're trying to, like, kind of figure out how to transition into a world that does both, while still keeping on the advantages that keeps our cost low, while still giving an experience that is superior to just having one mandatory option of work.
Totally. I hear you. And I think that also touches on a point to where we all are different. Teams are complex. They're not just business development. They're not just marketing. They are, computer scientists. They are data analysts. And, usually we were all in one room or one office. And so now we're having this hybrid work environment. And for startups especially, everything is intensified by a factor of 10, whether it's wins or losses or stresses or joys. So yeah, I think that is applicable from Mongolia to Calgary and back. So I know we all understand that. Enrique, I want to make sure you jump in. Do you have any quick thoughts on, how this has impacted kind of the global market, kind of in business, commerce, early stage startups?
Yeah. I think how much COVID affected you depended a little bit on the subsector that you were in. I mean, companies that were in the online travel agency space, for instance, were completely destroyed from one day to the other one. It was a black zone that nobody expected. We had a couple of companies in our portfolio that were in that space, and it wasn't easy. But some other companies highly profited from it. Homeschooling companies, for instance, or other ones that are in the crypto space, because people started having a little bit more time and started playing a little bit around with cryptocurrencies. No, so it depends a little bit on what sector you're in and how easy it was for you to adapt to the new ages. Overall, a consequence of the global pandemic was the even higher reduction of interest rates, which then, for one reason or the other one, affected public markets, and public markets affected private markets. Now we're seeing the contrary at the moment. When the interest rates went even lower, the valuations and the overall interest in private markets increased, and now the interest rates are going up again. We're seeing that valuations are going down, and the interest in private markets is being reduced. So it's going to be interesting to see how this affects us. I think COVID overall was very positive for technology. People that you never thought would use technology are using now technology. If I think about my grandma, she now even is using Amazon to buy new shoes. Nobody would have thought that a couple of years ago, and that's absolutely it's astonishing, at least for me. So yeah, I think overall COVID has had a positive impact on most of technological businesses, but obviously if you were in the wrong sector, it absolutely killed you. So yeah, that's a little bit my take on COVID.
Before we, thanks so much. And before we bring Nora back in from WSA, I just wanted to genuinely say, sincerely, how much I respect you. You've all won. You have, out of almost 300 companies, almost 10,000 companies that have applied since 2003, you are standing sort of in the winner's circle. And that's was really impressive. You're doing really hard things in hard markets. Thinking out of the box, that's never easy. And it's also very courageous, I'll tell you that. In a COVID world, to be born or to adapt in a COVID world, there's not much for me to say except hats off to you. It's impressive, and I know with all the WSA team, very much salute you. So well done. I'll ask Nora to jump in now, and yeah, Nora.
I have one more question from the audience to Enrique, because since he's still here, maybe if you have just the last minutes to answer the question, it's in what framework and sector do you think a collaboration between the public and the private sector would work best? Any thoughts in this regard? It's something completely else now.
Okay. So could you repeat that question, please?
Sure. In what framework and sector, or in what framework or sector, do you think a collaboration between the public and the private sector would work best?
Okay, that's a difficult one. But I would say the financial sector is a sector in which the public, the governments can have a massive effect on companies. I mean, we see it, for instance, in Europe with PSD2. There's this new regulation that came out that basically made sure that every user that wants to share the transactional data with another financial institution had to do it. That was a regulation that came from the governments, and that had a massive effect on financial services, and many big companies appeared thanks to that, and many companies are using that data now in order to do credit risk assessment, in order to initiate payments, direct debits, recurring payments, and all that fun stuff. So I would say financial services is definitely one, but I'm pretty sure that there's many other ones. I mean, RegTech, how many people call it, or regulatory technology, is also one. No? So whenever there is a change in regulation, people need to adapt to it. And the markets where there is a lot of regulation are normally financial services, and that's why the collaboration between governments and fintechs is so important. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks a lot.